10-year-old Sophie Pearson skipped happily along the mountain trail, her auburn pigtails bouncing with each step. Her parents, Mark and Lisa, followed close behind, smiling at their daughter's unbridled enthusiasm for their weekend hiking trip. The sun filtered through the tall pine trees, casting a dappled light on the well-worn path. It was a perfect day for an adventure. Not too hot, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of wildflowers and fresh mountain air. The Pearson family had been looking forward to this getaway for weeks, a chance to unplug from the hustle and bustle of their lives in the small town of Willowbrook and reconnect with nature. As they rounded a bend in the trail, Sophie's eyes lit up. "Look!" she exclaimed, pointing to a patch of bright purple flowers growing among the ferns. "Can I pick some for Grandma? She loves violets." Lisa nodded, pulling a small notebook from her backpack. "Sure, sweetie. Just be careful not to damage the roots." Sophie darted off the path and crouched down, carefully plucking a handful of delicate blooms. As she stood back up, a glint of something shiny caught her eye from deeper in the woods. Curious, she took a step forward, trying to get a better look. "Sophie, stay close," Mark called out, but his words were lost on the girl, who had already disappeared into the trees, lured by the mystery that awaited. Hours turned into days, and still there was no sign of Sophie. Search and rescue teams combed the mountainside, their voices echoing through the valleys as they called out her name. Helicopters buzzed overhead, scanning the dense forest for any trace of the missing girl. But as the sun set on the third day, hope began to wane. Back in Willowbrook, the community rallied around the Pearsons. Neighbors brought casseroles and offered words of comfort, while the local church held candlelight vigils each night. Everyone felt the weight of Sophie's absence, a hole torn in the fabric of their close-knit town. Lisa barely slept, spending her nights poring over maps of the area, trying to think like her adventurous daughter. Where would she have gone? What would have drawn her off the path? Mark busied himself organizing search parties, determined not to rest until his little girl was found. At the ranger station, lead investigator Tom Novak rubbed his bloodshot eyes, the stress of the past 72 hours etched on his weathered face. He'd seen cases like this before, and he knew the odds of a happy ending dwindled with each passing hour. But something about Sophie's disappearance didn't sit right with him. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. As he pored over the latest reports, a knock at the door startled him from his thoughts. One of his deputies stood in the doorway, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Sir," he said, his voice shaking, "you're going to want to see this." Sophie sat wrapped in a blanket, sipping hot chocolate as a medic checked her vital signs. Physically, she was unharmed, not a scratch on her. But it was the story she told that left the adults around her speechless. "The bear saved me," she said matter-of-factly, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "He showed me where to find water and berries, and kept me safe at night." Lisa clutched her daughter's hand, tears streaming down her face. "A bear? Sweetie, are you sure?" Sophie nodded, her eyes shining with conviction. "He was big and brown with a white patch on his chest, like a star." Mark exchanged a bewildered glance with Tom. In all his years living in these mountains, he'd never heard of a bear behaving in such a way. They were powerful, unpredictable creatures, more likely to see a human as a threat than a friend. But Sophie's story didn't waver. As the medic finished her exam, the girl reached into her pocket and pulled out a tuft of thick, brown fur. "He let me pet him," she said, holding it out for her parents to see. "He was soft." Tom took the fur, turning it over in his hands. There was no denying it, this was bear fur, all right? But how had this little girl not only survived her ordeal, but managed to befriend one of the forest's apex predators? It defied explanation. As Sophie drifted off to sleep, exhausted but content, Tom knew this was just the beginning. Something extraordinary had happened on that mountain, and he was determined to uncover the truth. News of Sophie's miraculous return spread like wildfire through Willowbrook. Reporters from the city drove up, eager to get a soundbite from the girl who had captured the nation's attention. But the Pearsons refused all interviews, wanting to shield their daughter from the media frenzy. At school, Sophie found herself the center of attention. Her classmates clamored to hear every detail of her adventure, their eyes wide with a mixture of awe and disbelief. Sophie told her story patiently, never tiring of reliving those precious days in the forest. But while the children readily accepted the idea of a gentle giant roaming the woods, the adults were more skeptical. Bears were dangerous, they reasoned. Surely the poor girl was confused, her memory distorted by hunger and fear. Tom refused to write off Sophie's story so easily. He spent long hours researching bear behavior, reaching out to wildlife experts across the country. And the more he learned, the more he began to suspect that this was no ordinary bear. There were stories, whispered legends passed down through generations, of a creature that walked the line between the natural and supernatural. A spirit bear, they called it, a guardian of the forest. Could it be that Sophie had crossed paths with this mythical being? As the investigation continued, Tom found himself drawn deeper into a world he never knew existed. A world where the boundaries between humans and nature blurred, and ancient mysteries still held sway. He didn't know where the truth would lead him, but he knew one thing for certain. Sophie's story was just the beginning. Weeks passed, and life in Willowbrook slowly returned to normal. Sophie was back in school, the media had moved on to the next big story, and the search teams had long since packed up and gone home. But for those who had been touched by Sophie's tale, nothing would ever be quite the same. Lisa found herself spending more time in the small garden behind their house, tending to the delicate shoots of new life that pushed their way up through the soil. There was something soothing about feeling the earth between her fingers, watching tiny seeds blossom into vibrant blooms. It reminded her that even in the darkest of times, hope could still take root. Mark, too, sought solace in nature. He took to going on long walks in the woods, following the same trails he and Sophie had once explored together. At first, he told himself he was looking for clues, some hint of the mysterious bear that had saved his daughter's life. But as the days turned into weeks, he realized that what he was really searching for was a sense of connection, a way to make peace with the forces that held sway over their lives. As for Sophie, she seemed to have taken her adventure in stride. She laughed and played with her friends, filling their ears with stories of her furry protector. But there were moments, too, when a faraway look would come into her eyes, and she would grow quiet, as if listening for a familiar growl on the wind. It was on one of these quiet days that Tom came to visit, a thick file folder tucked under his arm. He'd been following up on leads, chasing down every scrap of information he could find about the spirit bear of legend. And what he'd uncovered had left him more convinced than ever that there was more to Sophie's story than met the eye. Tom sat at the Pearsons' kitchen table, the file folder spread out before him. Inside were accounts from indigenous tribes across North America, each describing a creature that sounded remarkably like the one Sophie had encountered. A bear with a white star on its chest, a guardian of the forest, a bridge between worlds. Lisa and Mark listened intently, their eyes wide with wonder. Could it be true? Could their little girl have been chosen by some ancient spirit, plucked from the jaws of death for a purpose they could only begin to fathom? Tom leaned forward, his voice low and urgent. I've spoken with tribal elders, shamans, anyone who might have knowledge of this creature, and they all say the same thing. The spirit bear appears in times of great need, when the balance between humans and nature is threatened. Lisa felt a chill run down her spine. She thought of the logging company that had recently set up shop on the outskirts of town, the heavy machinery that had begun to encroach on the pristine wilderness that surrounded them. Could this be what the bear was trying to warn them about? Mark, ever the skeptic, furrowed his brow. But what can we do? He asked. We're just one small town, up against forces that are so much bigger than us. Tom smiled, a glint of determination in his eye. We start small, he said. We start with ourselves, with our community. We find ways to live in harmony with the land, to protect what's precious to us. And we trust that the spirit bear will guide us, just as it guided Sophie. And so, with a renewed sense of purpose, the people of Willowbrook began to mobilize. They organized cleanup drives in the forest, planted trees, and lobbied their representatives to put a halt to the logging operations. Slowly but surely, They began to see a change, not just in the world around them, but in themselves. As the weeks turned into months, the story of Sophie and the spirit bear began to take on a life of its own. It spread beyond the boundaries of Willowbrook, inspiring people across the country to take a closer look at their relationship with the natural world. In the town itself, a new sense of unity had taken hold. Neighbors who had once barely spoken now greeted each other with warm smiles, bonded by their shared commitment to protecting their little corner of the wilderness. The local diner became a hub of activity, a place where people gathered to swap ideas and plan their next move. But not everyone was thrilled with the newfound sense of purpose that had taken hold of Willowbrook. The logging company, in particular, saw the town's efforts as a direct threat to their bottom line. They pushed back hard, using their deep pockets and political connections to try to quash any opposition. For a while, it seemed like the town's efforts might be in vain. But just when things seemed darkest, a new development rocked the community. A hiker, deep in the woods, had captured a blurry photo of a creature that looked suspiciously like the spirit bear of legend. The image went viral, sparking a renewed interest in Sophie's story and the town's fight to protect their land. Suddenly, Willowbrook found itself at the center of a media firestorm. Reporters from around the globe descended on the tiny town, eager to catch a glimpse of the mysterious creature that had captured the world's imagination. Tom and the Pearsons found themselves thrust into the spotlight, their every move scrutinized by millions. But through it all, they held fast to their convictions. They knew that the spirit bear had chosen them for a reason, that they had been given a sacred duty to protect the delicate balance between humans and nature. And they were determined to see it through no matter the cost. As the media circus surrounding Willowbrook reached a fever pitch, tensions within the town began to boil over. There were those who resented the sudden influx of outsiders, who felt that their quiet way of life was being threatened by the constant scrutiny. Others saw the attention as a blessing in disguise, a way to shine a light on the issues that had long plagued their community: poverty, addiction, a lack of opportunity for young people. They hoped that the spirit bear's message of unity and harmony could be a catalyst for real change. Amidst the chaos, Sophie remained a beacon of calm. She continued to tell her story to anyone who would listen, her eyes shining with the memory of her time in the forest. She spoke of the bear's gentle strength, the way it had nurtured her, protected her, guided her back to safety. And as she spoke, something began to shift in the hearts of those around her. Old grudges fell away, long-standing feuds were forgotten. People began to see each other not as adversaries, but as neighbors, as fellow travelers on this wild and unpredictable journey called life. Even the logging company, faced with an unprecedented wave of public pressure, began to reconsider its stance. They reached out to the town's leaders, offering to work together to find a sustainable solution that would balance the needs of the community with the demands of industry. It was a small victory, but a meaningful one, a sign that even in the face of seemingly insurmountable odds, change was possible. That by coming together, by listening to the wisdom of the natural world, they could chart a new course for themselves and for generations to come. As fall gave way to winter, a new challenge arose for the people of Willowbrook. A harsh cold snap hit the region, blanketing the mountains in deep snow and plunging temperatures to record lows. For the wildlife that called the forest home, the sudden shift in weather was a matter of life and death. Food became scarce, and many animals struggled to find shelter from the biting winds and icy rain. Sophie, ever attuned to the needs of her furry friends, knew she had to do something. She rallied her classmates and neighbors, organizing food drives and building makeshift shelters for the creatures that were most at risk. At first, some in the town were skeptical. Why go to all this trouble for a bunch of wild animals, they asked. Shouldn't they be focusing on their own needs, making sure their families had enough to eat and stay warm? But Sophie was undeterred. She reminded them of the lesson the spirit bear had taught her, that all life was sacred, that they were all connected in a delicate web of interdependence. By helping the animals, she argued, they were really helping themselves. As the weeks passed, the town began to see the wisdom in Sophie's words. They marveled at the resilience of the creatures that shared their home, the way they adapted and persevered in the face of unimaginable hardship. And in that spirit of resilience, they found a renewed sense of strength within themselves. They banded together, pooling their resources and their expertise to weather the storm. They checked in on elderly neighbors, shoveled driveways, shared what little they had with those who had even less. Through it all, the spirit bear remained a constant presence, a reminder of the power of compassion and the unbreakable bonds that tied them all together. And as the snow began to melt and the first tentative signs of spring began to emerge, the people of Willowbrook knew that they had been forever changed by the extraordinary events of the past year. As the town slowly thawed from the long winter, a sense of renewal began to take hold. Seeds that had lain dormant beneath the snow began to sprout, painting the hillsides with vibrant wildflowers. The air grew warm and sweet, filled with the sound of birdsong and the buzz of insects. For Sophie, the changing of the seasons brought with it a newfound sense of purpose. She knew that her journey with the spirit bear was far from over, that there was still so much work to be done to protect the fragile balance of the natural world. She began to spend more and more time in the forest, observing the plants and animals that called it home. She took careful notes in a small leather-bound journal, sketching the delicate veins of a leaf, the intricate patterns of a butterfly's wing. And as she wandered deeper into the wilderness, she began to feel a strange pull, a tug at the edges of her consciousness. It was as if the spirit bear was calling to her, guiding her towards some greater purpose that she had yet to fully understand. One day, as she sat beneath a towering oak tree, lost in thought, a rustling in the underbrush caught her attention. She looked up to see a pair of eyes peering out at her from the shadows, eyes that she would recognize anywhere. It was the spirit bear, its white star shining like a beacon in the dappled sunlight. Sophie felt her heart skip a beat, a mixture of joy and reverence washing over her. She knew that this moment was a gift, a sign that she was on the right path. As the bear emerged from the trees, Sophie rose to meet it, her hand outstretched in a gesture of trust and friendship. And as their eyes met, she felt a surge of understanding pass between them, a wordless communication that spoke of the deep, unbreakable connection between all living things. In that moment, Sophie knew that her story was far from over, that the spirit bear had chosen her for a reason, to be a voice for the voiceless, a champion for the wild places that were rapidly disappearing from the world. And she knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, she would never be alone, for the spirit of the bear would always be with her, guiding her every step of the way. As spring turned to summer, the town of Willowbrook found itself at a crossroads. The logging company, under pressure from its shareholders, had begun to push back against the community's efforts to protect the forest. They argued that the town's economy depended on the timber industry, that without it, jobs would be lost and families would suffer. For Sophie and her family, the conflict struck at the very heart of their newfound connection to the natural world. They knew that the forest was more than just a resource to be exploited. It was a living, breathing entity, a source of wisdom and healing that had brought them back from the brink of despair. As tensions mounted, Sophie found herself increasingly drawn to the spirit bear, seeking its guidance and strength in the face of the challenges that lay ahead. And one day, as she sat in quiet contemplation beneath the ancient trees, a vision came to her. A glimpse of a future in which humans and nature lived in harmony, each supporting and sustaining the other. She knew then what she had to do. With the help of her family and friends, Sophie began to organize a series of town meetings, inviting loggers and environmentalists alike to come together and share their perspectives. It was a daunting task, but one that she knew was essential if they were to find a way forward. At first, the meetings were tense and acrimonious, with each side entrenched in its own position. But as they began to listen to each other's stories of hardship and resilience, of love and loss, something began to shift. Slowly but surely, they began to see each other not as enemies, but as neighbors, as fellow travelers on the same winding path. They began to understand that their fates were intertwined, that what affected one affected all. And as the summer drew to a close, a new vision began to take shape. A vision of a town that could be a model for the world, a place where industry and ecology could coexist in balance and harmony. It would not be an easy road, they knew, but it was one that they were willing to walk together, guided by the spirit of the bear and the unbreakable bonds of community. As the leaves began to turn and the air grew crisp with the promise of autumn, Sophie knew that the time had come to put their vision into action. With the help of Tom and a team of experts from the university, they began to develop a plan for sustainable logging practices that would allow the industry to thrive while still protecting the delicate ecosystem of the forest. It was a complex undertaking, one that required careful negotiation and compromise on all sides. But Sophie remained steadfast in her conviction, drawing strength from the spirit bear and the unwavering support of her community. As the plan began to take shape, the town of Willowbrook buzzed with a new sense of purpose and excitement. Volunteers came forward to help with reforestation efforts, planting seedlings in areas that had been damaged by past logging operations. Local artisans began to experiment with new uses for timber byproducts, creating beautiful and sustainable crafts that showcased the beauty of the wood without depleting its source. And at the heart of it all was Sophie, her quiet determination and unshakable faith inspiring those around her to new heights of creativity and collaboration. She knew that the road ahead would not be easy, that there would be setbacks and challenges along the way, but she also knew that they had something more powerful than any obstacle they might face. They had each other and the spirit of the bear that had brought them together. As the first snows of winter began to fall, Sophie stood at the edge of the forest, looking out over the vast expanse of wilderness that stretched before her. She could feel the presence of the spirit bear beside her, its strength and wisdom flowing through her like a gentle current. And in that moment, she knew that they had already won. For in coming together, in opening their hearts to the wisdom of the natural world, they had tapped into a power greater than any one of them could have imagined. A power that would sustain them through whatever challenges lay ahead, and guide them toward a future of harmony and balance for generations to come. As winter settled over Willowbrook like a soft white blanket, Sophie found herself spending more and more time in the forest, seeking solace in the stillness and beauty of the snow-covered landscape. It was on one of these solitary walks that she encountered the spirit bear once more, its presence a welcome reminder of the journey that had brought her to this moment. As she sat beside the bear in the hush of the winter woods, Sophie reflected on all that had happened since that fateful day when she had first been lost among the trees. She thought of the fear and desperation she had felt, the loneliness and doubt that had threatened to overwhelm her. But she also thought of the courage and resilience that had carried her through, the love and support of her family and community that had never wavered. And most of all, she thought of the spirit bear, the guardian of the forest that had chosen her for a purpose she was only beginning to understand. As if sensing her thoughts, the bear turned to face her, its eyes shining with a deep and ancient wisdom. And in that moment, Sophie knew that her journey was far from over, that the path ahead would be filled with twists and turns, with moments of darkness and light. But she also knew that she was not alone, that the spirit of the bear would always be with her, guiding her steps and illuminating the way forward. And with that knowledge, she felt a sense of peace and purpose settle over her like a warm embrace. As the winter months passed and the town of Willowbrook continued to work towards its vision of sustainability and harmony, Sophie began to see the first signs of change taking root. Loggers and environmentalists who had once been at odds now worked side by side, their shared commitment to the health of the forest overriding their differences. Children played in the newly planted groves, their laughter mingling with the rustling of leaves and the chirping of birds. And everywhere she looked, Sophie saw signs of renewal and regeneration, a testament to the power of community and the resilience of the human spirit. And through it all, the spirit bear remained a constant presence, a reminder of the deep and abiding connection between all living things, a connection that had the power to heal, to transform, and to guide them towards a brighter and more hopeful future. As the winter snow began to melt and the first tentative signs of spring began to emerge, Sophie knew that the time had come to share her story with the world. With the help of her family and friends, she began to plan a celebration that would bring together the entire town of Willowbrook, a chance to honor the journey they had taken together and to look forward to the future they were building. On the day of the celebration, the sun shone bright and clear, as if in blessing of the momentous occasion. People from all walks of life gathered in the town square, their faces alight with joy and anticipation. As Sophie took the stage, a hush fell over the crowd. She looked out at the sea of faces before her, each one a testament to the power of love and community. And as she began to speak, her voice strong and clear, she knew that this was the moment she had been born for. She told the story of her journey, of the fear and desperation she had felt when she was lost in the woods, and of the spirit bear that had guided her back to safety. She spoke of the lessons she had learned, of the deep and abiding connection between humans and nature, and of the responsibility they all shared to protect and nurture the world around them. As she spoke, Sophie could feel the energy of the crowd building, a palpable sense of hope and possibility that filled the air like electricity. And when she finished, the applause that erupted was like thunder, a roaring affirmation of all that they had accomplished together. In the days and weeks that followed, the story of Sophie and the spirit bear began to spread, inspiring people from all corners of the globe to take up the cause of environmental stewardship and community building. And as the years passed and the town of Willowbrook continued to thrive, Sophie knew that the legacy of the spirit bear would endure, a shining example of the power of one small act of courage to change the world. For in the end, she knew it was not about the destination, but about the journey, about the choices they made each day to live in harmony with the world around them, to open their hearts to the wisdom and beauty of the natural world. And in that journey, in that endless dance of renewal and regeneration, they would find the strength and resilience to face whatever challenges lay ahead, secure in the knowledge that they were never alone, and that the spirit of the bear would always be with them, lighting the way forward. As spring bloomed once again in Willowbrook, Sophie celebrated her 11th birthday. The celebration was held at the edge of the forest, where wooden tables groaned under the weight of homemade pies and fresh lemonade. Children played among newly planted saplings, while adults shared stories of the remarkable changes they'd witnessed over the past year. During the party, Sophie slipped away quietly, drawn to a familiar path that led deeper into the woods. As she walked, memories of her extraordinary adventure flooded back, not with fear, but with a profound sense of gratitude. The forest felt different now. It was no longer just a collection of trees and shadows, but a living, breathing community of which she was intimately a part. A rustling in the undergrowth caught her attention, and there, in a shaft of golden sunlight, stood the spirit bear. Its white star seemed to shimmer as it regarded her with those knowing eyes. But this time, Sophie noticed something new, two small cubs peeking out from behind their guardian, their own tiny white stars barely visible against their brown fur. Tears of joy welled in Sophie's eyes as she understood the message. Just as new life was springing forth in the forest, so too was hope multiplying and spreading beyond their small town. The spirit bear's legacy would continue, passed down through generations, just as the story of their encounter had inspired countless others to forge their own connections with the natural world. Back at the party, Sophie shared what she had seen with her parents and Tom. The hardened investigator's eyes softened as she described the cubs, and he nodded in understanding. The mystery he had set out to solve had evolved into something far more meaningful, a reminder that some truths could only be felt with the heart. That evening, as the sun set behind the mountains, casting long shadows across Willowbrook, the townspeople gathered for a tradition that had begun after Sophie's return. They sang songs of gratitude, shared stories of transformation, and planted a new tree this year, a young oak that would grow to shelter future generations. Sophie stood beside the sapling, her hand resting gently on its tender bark. She thought of all the children who would grow up knowing the importance of living in harmony with nature, of the lessons they would learn from the forest and its mysterious guardian. The spirit bear had shown her that love, in its purest form, knew no boundaries, not between species, not between the physical and spiritual worlds. As stars began to twinkle overhead, a warm breeze carried the distant sound of a gentle growl, a reminder that magic still existed in the world, if only one knew where to look for it. Sophie smiled, knowing that her journey with the spirit bear had not ended. It had only transformed, like the seasons, into something new and equally beautiful. For in the end, the greatest gift the spirit bear had given them all was not just survival or environmental awareness, but the understanding that every living thing was connected in an endless dance of love, loss, and renewal. And as long as there were those willing to listen to the whispers of the forest and follow the path of harmony, hope would continue to grow, strong and true as the ancient trees themselves. End of the story.